Ready.
Okay, so I'm Krista Bedwin, and I'm here with Kelly Metz-Matthews, and we're going to tell you a bit about Google document reviewing. And so first of all, Kelly, can you introduce yourself to us a little bit, please?
I am happy to, Krista, but first I want to say thank you so much for having me today. It's always fun to talk about writing in all its forms. But I am Kelly Metz-Matthews. I am a professor of English for speakers of other languages, and also rhetoric. So I teach across those disciplines and sometimes train teachers to teach in those disciplines.
I suppose I should have introduced myself too, that I teach at UBC, teaching engineers to write better. So we're both, writing teachers. So we were going to talk today about how to compose a document in Google Documents. And so what is the difference between composing it? Let's start with that. We've been doing it in Word for a long time. What's the difference between doing it in a Google document compared to doing it in Microsoft Word?
Well, there's not too much of a difference where the actual composition takes place, right? Like you're typing it up, you're formatting it in the same ways. You actually can import a Word document into Google Docs, and you can import something from a Google document. You can save it as a Word document. So those are options for you. But where the real composition takes place, there isn't much difference. You get to do all of the same things that you would normally do. You get to double space your document and choose your font and indent your paragraphs, and all the things that you would do in Word, you're going to do in Google Docs.
Yeah, so they're pretty compatible programs, which used to be something that we worried about a lot, but now it's good. So how did you first? I think I first learned about Google Documents through some editing jobs I worked on. And then my kid, of course, in high school taught me way more about Google Docs than I learned even from work. So how did you first start? And you work collaboratively with a co-author. So can you tell us about that?
I sure can. I can't remember what year it was, but I have a feeling it was at work. And I have a feeling when I first encountered Google Docs, I thought, I don't need a new program or platform or genre or anything. I don't need anything new. Like I've got it all over here. We're already doing it. And so I think it took me some getting used to, is I suppose the point that I would make. But I recall after, like a few times really trying this out, and in particular, sharing it with other people and having them share documents with me, I recognized the inherent benefit of having something that was constantly saving, constantly updating, and was collaborative, right? Where I really could work easily with others. So it took me a little getting used to, because we just weren't using Google Docs as much at the time. This has to have been years ago. I want to say a solid 5 years ago, at least. But in the last few years, I have used Google Docs. I wouldn't say exclusively, but certainly when I have a choice, I 100% of the time use Google Docs. And that is not just for me, because I'm not losing things, right? We've all had that experience. Your computer crashes and you lose the document that you spent months working on. Yeah. So I'm able to avoid that because it is saved in my Google Drive. It is there and I always have access to it. And I'm always accessing the most recent version, the most updated version, and still can go back and gain access to older versions. You can actually use, I'm not sure how familiar you are with this, but you can actually go back into older versions of your Google document and look at changes you've made. So like having that connection to a document and being able to look back at earlier versions of the document is really helpful for me from a developmental perspective. I can look back and say, what was my thinking when I first started this section? And I can look up what that thinking is or what it was at the time.
And I know sometimes you go in and they're like, oh, those thoughts were ridiculous, and you delete them. And if you've done it in Word, you can't get them back. Like, yeah, that's why I try to save versions in Word. But with the Google Docs, your history will stay there. So you can go back and save yourself from your deletion ridiculousness or
right. Save yourself from yourself, right? Basically is what that is.
And so yes. Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
How do you work collaboratively with your co-author on it? How does that work for you? Like, what's the process?
Absolutely. So, it depends on the project that we are working on. But I have a good friend, colleague, and co-author by the name of Michelle McConnell. She is an assistant professor at Fresno Pacific University. So, a little shout out to Michelle. And we've worked collaboratively on a number of projects. I want to say 5 or 6 recent, on top of some other things, conference proposals and the like. And we have traditionally used Google Docs as a way to edit, revise our work, to actually compose the work in the first place in a number of instances, where we each start on a different page of the Google document and we're sort of throwing our thoughts into the document and later bringing those pieces together in a really coherent way. And we have also used Google Docs as a way to dialogue about our work. So it's not uncommon for us to individually say, okay, I'll start a Google Doc for this paper and I'll add some of my thoughts. And if you over the next week will add some of yours, and we'll come together next week and see if we can, merge these thoughts.
And so another really nice thing about this is that like sometimes I know working on Word and working with big publishing teams, you have the document and then it says December the 12th and you send it over to Tom. Tom works on it, but then he has a different version or something, and then it comes back, and then collating all these versions is just a nightmare, right? And so if you've got a team of 5 or 6 people, everybody's actually working in the same document, even at the same time sometimes.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things we love. So, we perhaps start this out as one of us starts out individually. We share the Google Doc with the other. We then each add our own pieces, but it is not unusual for us to then maybe bring in a third author or to have a colleague come in and take a look at it and give us some feedback on it. And sometimes you'll see us all in there working at the same time. We can see one another, and you can anonymize yourself, by the way, but we typically don't. We know who's in the document working. So we work together. And one of the great things about that is we can schedule time, and we do this pretty frequently. We have scheduled times, typically on Thursdays and or Fridays, and we will go into our shared document. We will pull it up, and individually, while we're on Zoom chatting, we'll work on the document. And I'll say, Michelle, I think I'm going to work on that conclusion. And she'll say, oh, great, I was going to work on the methods section. And then maybe every 20 minutes, we'll come back together and talk through the edits that we have each made. And we can see what the other is doing. And if we have questions, we ask them, right? It gives us an opportunity to ask clarifying questions as they arise. And if we have suggestions, we can throw those in organically as they come up, right? So it provides us with an opportunity to really do that work together in a way that, frankly,
even in the same room, you couldn't do it.
I'm not even sure what would happen in the same room, because if you're in the same room, you're still not working on the same document.
Paper,
you're talking
exactly.
through it, but you're not working on it. Whereas we can attack the same document together at the same time in Google Docs.
More intimate than monks in a room together, really. So I had this experience with my son working on one of his grade 12 papers. And, I was just helping him go through some spelling, and we were there on our 2 laptops side by side, and I was able to fix that up, and you can see the words changing on this screen.
Yes.
It's trippy. It's good, but it's cool. It's amazing. Yeah.
It is, but it's also, it provides, Michelle and I recently in another paper talked about sort of the third spaces that are sometimes created, like third discourse spaces that are sometimes created in collaborative work. And sometimes we think of sort of the writings in the margins as a sort of third space, right? Mm-hmm. Because we actually, if we aren't working together, right, like we just talked about, while we're in the document at the same time, we actually engage in a whole form of dialogue in the margins. So it's not unusual for me to share what otherwise might be inner thoughts, right? Yes. So things like, I have no idea what I'm trying to say right here. Can you tell what I'm getting at? Because I feel like this is not making sense, right? Those things that we typically say to ourselves, I now
Yes.
have the opportunity to share with a co-author and or a partner or an editor, or whoever it is, and have them say, well, actually, I think I see what you mean, or I see where you lost your train of thought a little bit here. Do you mean this? And then we move forward in a
And
way.
instead of writing this editing in pencil, like we used to do, you just right away, like go in there, change the sentence. And then, well, as we were saying before, but so even though if I went in and changed your sentence and you
Mhm.
didn't like what I did, you could see what I had done and
Yep.
undo that and go backwards.
Right.
So nothing is really, there's no danger. There's no losses with Google Docs. That's the amazing, there's no like erasing, like you erase it, but then it's still there. You can see it. So
Right.
yeah, pretty
Right.
much.
And it that is that that safety net, if you will, just increases our level of anxiety as writers who have all probably lost work before, or or just deleted our own work because we thought, well, I don't really need this anymore. And then realized, like we said earlier, we needed to come back to that earlier thinking that we
Yeah.
perhaps had, maybe an earlier framework that we were utilizing,
Yeah.
and thought we didn't need. So we let it
So,
go.
so speaking of safety, sometimes people get anxious about privacy with Google. Have you had any issues with people stealing your work on Google?
Never,
Yeah.
never. No, I can't speak for the entire public who has used Google Documents before, but I have never had that issue. I don't know anyone who has. I've never lost any work.
What
Yeah,
happens if you forget where the Google document is? Are you able to go find it again?
you're able to do a pretty quick and easy search. And the other great thing about Google Docs is for the most part, you're housing them in your drive, right? You're keeping them there. You're not just downloading them to your computer. And so it's really easy to search your drive for things. It's really easy to organize it in folders in the same way that you would organize your desktop, for example, if you're that person. Right? Um, so it's very easy to find, very easy to organize. At least in my experience, I haven't had any issues or concerns in that regard.
So do you have any other final tips and tricks you'd like to tell us about Google Docs before we wrap this up?
Um,
Favorite parts about it?
Favorite parts. Get creative, right? One of the things that my writing partner and I have done is not just use the more traditional functions like editing the document itself, right? Like typing in changes and then using the
Comment.
comments in the margins. We also have gotten really used to highlighting things and adding other elements, and you can do all of that in Google Docs. And that is a way that we highlight and bring attention to certain things for each other. So get a little creative. You have lots of opportunities to really use Google Docs to its fullest, if you will. And I think we found a lot of success using those additional functions, right? And then I would say think of it broadly as an opportunity for discourse and for conversation, right? We have the ability to annotate our own work in Google Docs, but to also dialogue with others, not just through the edits we are making, but in the margins. So use that in as robust a
Hmm.
way you can.
That's definitely the benefits of being part of a publishing team instead of writing by ourselves. Is just knowing the give and take always makes it, well, usually makes a stronger document. Almost always, as long as
Yeah.
you're working with good professionals. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you very much. I think this has been very useful, and thanks for talking to us.
I was thrilled to be here. Thanks so much and happy Google documenting.